and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. Today on the show, we're going to talk a little about the Green Bridge. And no,
this bridge
isn't
to nowhere, Brian?
Right. No, this is not an engineering feat. This is going into a fall seeded crop. We want to make sure that everything is dead first. We'll talk a little about how to do that on the show today.
Well, also going into any fall seeded crop or going into next year's crop, we have to do a good job taking soil samples, but we need tools. There's a new tool available that's free to use to help you take soil tests and then understand what's going on in your soils as well.
We've got a Weed of the Week coming up later in the show as well. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little about chopping corn heads. And this is one of the things we had at our field day, had a live demonstration there. The thing that kind of surprised me a little bit is how many guys were not maybe looking at this for the first time, but were actually getting real serious about, I've got to do something a little different for residue management on my farm.
That's the key, residue management, because everybody thinks about, the first thing you think is, well, am I going to save a pass chopping stalks, or is it necessary to chop stalks in my field? No, I look at this as a residue management issue, and this year it really stood out. We had a long winter and a cold winter really across the whole country, and so everybody had a little bit of a late start, and we saw such huge differences where the residue was not evenly distributed in the fields with emergence. We saw problems where corn was coming up and it was uneven, and that really played out all the way until the fields kind of evened up with tasseling. I think it's going to be a huge difference in yield where we had even residue distribution versus where we didn't. It was really nice to see the chopping corn heads at our farm. Now, we don't have them in action in mid-July, but we did actually get to see them, and there were working models that, actual heads that they could fold up, show you how all the parts work underneath, and that caught more attention than about anything with equipment that we had.
About 20 years ago on our farm, because of the highly erodible land that we have, we switched a number of acres to no-till. Well, before we got into no-till, we talked to a number of no-till farmers and kind of read up and studied up on what are the right practices we need to implement when we go into no-till. One of the things we'd heard from a lot of people around the country is you need to leave your stalks standing tall. So we did that in the beginning, and what we found was disaster. The reasons why is, number one, it did trap moisture in our field, and to some degree that's good, but we do have a lot of snowfall, and it kept our soils colder as we went into the spring. The other thing, and this is really the biggest factor, is those stalks were standing tall, but then when spring came along, they would tip over, they'd be laying right in the middle of the row, and then when we'd go along with our planter, because we're planting early in the spring in damp conditions, those stalks wouldn't cut very well with our coulters, even brand new coulters. So we ended up with a lot of hairpinning of residue and a lot of seeds dropping on top of residue, and obviously our stands were not very good. So that's something that we said, boy, we got to do something different here. So even when we switched to strip till, so it doesn't matter, strip till, no till, a lot of the guys have felt over the years the same way, leave the stalks standing tall. We completely disagree with that. Our yields improved dramatically when we started cutting those stalks much lower and actually chopping them.
Well, we saw guys getting back into conventional tillage, and that was the solution. Now I've got to go back to conventional tillage. Really, the residue management that we get from a chopping corn head has taken away that need, even in continuous corn. We don't see that residue building up in our fields over a period of years like many guys have fought around the country because we've chopped that residue up into relatively small pieces.
Well, that's one part of it, sure. There are many other soil factors. Yeah, you've got to have earthworm activity and the right calcium amount in your soil and the right fertility overall. So it's not just the chopping of residue, but this is an important thing. When you've got those pieces chopped, and especially through the middle of the stalk, boy, that makes a huge difference in terms of the speed of breakdown as you go into that next year.
And one of the questions I get about chopping corn heads from farmers all across the country is, what about wind? Are you going to lose a lot of that residue when you chop it up if I'm in a windy situation? And we do get a lot of wind on our farm, especially it seems around harvest time. We get lots of wind. And we haven't seen a big problem with one major decision that we've made. When we're doing a chopping corn head, we like to chop a little higher. Some guys want to chop down very low to the ground, and if you don't have rocks, you definitely can do that and make that choice for your farm. But when we chop a little bit higher, we'll leave stalks standing a foot, maybe even a little bit taller. I'm only talking about a foot here. It doesn't
or
look
a foot and a half. Yep.
Doesn't look very tall out in the field. But when we leave that, we've got a fence. And now all that residue that we chopped and we dropped straight down in between the rows, now every 30 inches in our farm, because we're on 30-inch row spacings, we've got a fence out there that will catch any residue that blows. We really don't have much residue leaving the field at all.
The other big question that we get is, why a chopping corn head? Why not just run a stalk chopper out there after you've gone through? Well, the thing is, you've already run down a number of stalks and it's another pass across the field. So why not take care of it all in one shot? These chopping corn heads, it's something that I can't guarantee you will never go away from this on our farm, but the way it appears to me for the next 30 years I'm farming, I want to always do it with the chopping corn head. This is a major deal on our farm. It helps speed our residue breakdown and just helps us manage residue in general in our corn.
Well, one other thing we have to manage well is weed control. Can you identify this week's weed?
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Extend soybeans will provide tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate and will be built on the Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield trait. See them in action at extendfollowafield.com.
Being a farmer means securing your land and livelihood for the future. Harvest Solutions from Capello USA have the grit to get you there. Our product lines for corn, sunflowers, and forage are designed for efficiency and longevity, preventing harvest loss while minimizing maintenance and downtime. To do everything you can to advance your farmland to the next generation, call us at 855-CAPELLO or visit us at capellousa.com. Capello USA, Italian craftsmanship, American grit.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grit sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
Diversity, in a word. That sums up really the best way to try and manage any of these glyphosate or any of these herbicide-resistant weeds, not just glyphosate-resistant weeds, is using a diverse set of tactics, both with herbicides and culturally, to keep them off balance, to keep those resistance from developing on a field.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave pea. Most of your applied pea gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more pea available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing pea availability can lead to increased pea uptake in the plant. That's more pea, and more pea. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your pea with Avail.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
In most cases across the country, we feel that improper nutrition is the #1 cause of yield loss, or put it another way, is the #1 limiting factor why farmers aren't getting higher yields. But it's complicated, it's tricky to understand, well, what is the right program for fertility? We want to try to help make that a little bit easier for you.
Well, getting a base of knowledge is really important on your farm. You really understand how important this is as you start taking some soil samples yourself and really analyzing that data. Now, you may say, well, I'm going to have somebody else pull samples for me, and I'm not saying that's a wrong thing to do, because there are a lot of good people out there that can take soil samples for you. But just knowing where those samples came from for sure and understanding what that soil test is telling you is so critical. We really encourage you on your farm, start managing things on a smaller scale. start looking at grid or zone sampling on your farm. If you're taking one sample for a 40-acre or 100-acre field, it's just too big an area and there's too much variance out there. And with the technology that most of us have right now in our equipment on the farm, we can manage things on a lot smaller scale than we used to.
What we've done is launched a free Ag PhD soil test app for your smartphone or your iPad. We really encourage you to download this. This is going to allow you to select your field, place grid points very simply and easily, and even move those grid points as a whole, move the entire grid, set up wherever you want. Then you can walk out into your field with the GPS on your smartphone or iPad and actually pull soil samples. Then you can send those samples in. They'll correlate directly back to that point that you set up yourself, and you can have both Midwest Labs recommendations and our recommendations. So this is something that Darren and I have worked on for many months now. We've been just trying to get this thing developed so it's something that's good and usable for you on your farm, and also so it's easy to do and inexpensive. It's a free app. It's not going to cost you anything extra beyond soil testing. In fact, you might even find it costs you a little bit less because we've developed this in conjunction with Farm Logic, Midwest Labs, and ourselves. So it's just a way to try to help you do a better job because, again, we feel this is the #1 problem that there is in agriculture today. We've got to understand soils better and understand what we need to do for fertility better, not just to make more money, not just to get more yield, but also let's look at the environmental side. In other words, what I'm saying here is if we only have a few farmers who don't do it right around the country, that's going to affect all of us because we have more regulations.
Well, let's just say you've got a 70 bushel yield goal on your soybeans or a 100 bushel yield goal on your wheat, and you get results back from the lab and they say, well, here's your soil analysis and here's how many pounds of N, P, and K and sulfur and micros you need to apply. Do we just follow that blindly? Do we just go out on our farm and say, well, here's the numbers they said, let's give it to my fertilizer dealer and get it spread out on my field? You know, that doesn't really tell you very much. You don't know when you need to apply those nutrients. You don't know if those nutrient goals are right. Maybe for your farm you say, wow, they're only recommending that I put on 30 pounds of phosphorus. I know I'm getting response for more. Or I'm not just shooting for 50 bushel soybeans. I want to have 80 bushel soybeans on my farm because I see it on my yield monitor. I can get 80 in certain areas of my field where my soils are built up a little better. We've got some explanation as you get those results back of, hey, here's the recommendations of how many pounds of these nutrients we need to apply, but here's a little bit more detail about this is why you need this, or here's how you fix that problem on your farm and why it's so important to you. Because, we're developing these things for our farm too. We're looking at all of our soils every year about how can we solve these problems out there, because once we fix them, they're fixed for the next 20 or 30 years in many cases. So we want you to have the ability to do that on your farm as well.
So over the winter, we've been putting on these soil clinics, and we talk about these things on Ag PhD TV and Ag PhD radio, but there's nothing like having your own data from your own fields and getting our analysis and Midwest Labs as well. So you can see, oh, okay, now this is exactly what I need to do. So we really encourage you, take a look at and download this Ag PhD free soil test app for your smartphone or your iPad and start using that today.
And one other thing you may need to solve today is a weed control problem. If you have, our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed coming up later in the show.
How will you secure your farm for the future? The Quasar Chopping Cornhead from Capello USA will help. Our design is focused on efficiency, longevity, and reducing harvest loss, making the Quasar the corn harvest solution to bring your farm forward. With hundreds of units ready for immediate delivery, secure your farm's future today. Do it for your farm. Do it for them. Order now. Capello USA. Italian craftsmanship, American grit.
We know that the future is liquid. That's how Agriculture Liquid Fertilizer creates the highest quality products on the market. Because we're committed to finding the best raw materials at the best price possible and getting them from us to you in the most sustainable, responsible ways possible. Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers, helping you grow the future.
It's a humble idea. Use a biological process to turn a plant into a power source. From that idea came the first Poet Refinery. One biorefinery in one town turned into 27 facilities in 27 towns, creating new local jobs, producing hundreds of millions of gallons of ethanol, and providing renewable products around the world. Suddenly, that one little idea seems a whole lot bigger. See the world differently with Poet.
The world of farming is changing. Titan Machinery and Case IH are here to make sure you're ready. The demands on agriculture keep growing. The challenge for producers is to continue to keep pace. To be successful, you'll need equipment that can get the most out of every inch of land, innovations that help you work faster, and advice from people who know your field as well as they know your equipment. Don't get left behind. Be ready with Case IH and Titan Machinery. Better solutions.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
If you want to have great fall seeded crops, one of the most important things you need to consider on your farm is eliminating the green bridge.
You know, as wheat comes off, there's going to be things that pop back up in that field, even if you're not seeding a cover crop. It's volunteer wheat, it's weeds, different things like that. And think about it, I mean, it makes so much sense. As you have problems out in your wheat field, whether it's insects or diseases, if they have another host, they can keep living in your field. So maybe that host is a weed, maybe it's volunteer wheat, that's an obvious host, or maybe it's even the cover crop that you choose. Maybe you're using a cover crop blend and you say, well, I'm going to plant wheat again later this fall, but in the meantime, I've got a blend that has some grasses and some broadleaves. Those diseases and insects can find a home, survive. Now when your next crop pops up, they can attach right to it, and if you get a problem in your crop in the fall, you're going to have a huge problem going into next year.
Yeah, and it's not just wheat we're talking about here. It's really any fall seeded crop. If you've had a crop on there this year, or even if you haven't had a crop, let's say it was prevent plant, but there is something growing out there, weeds or cover crop, anything really, going into a fall seeded crop, the idea here is we want to kill everything, have that field not necessarily black with tillage, but at least dead from spray or black from tillage, one or the other, for at least a week, if not 2 weeks. The reason why is mainly because of disease and insects. If the disease and insects don't have a host for a little while, hopefully they're going to die off. So like I say, you know, in a week's time, usually that's enough, but just to be safe, if you can, if you have the time, we'd like to see a 2-week window there where everything in the field is dead.
Well, you know, I don't want to negate the impact that cover crops can make, because there's so much interest around the country, and rightly so, about keeping something growing in your field as much of the time as possible. Believe me, I'm all for that. I love cover crops. If you took wheat off this summer and you're going through the rest of the months of the summer waiting to seed that fall crop, I love having a cover crop out there. I think it's great for the soil, for all the little microorganisms underneath, for nutrient availability, for erosion control, all those things. It's fantastic. But at some point you have to pull the plug and you have to wipe that cover crop out. Now, if you're going to have a spring seeded crop and you've got just annuals out there in your cover crop, hey, no problem. They're going to die off this fall if it's not something you're worried about going to seed. But if you've got a fall seeded crop coming in, you have to be realistic. You really need a couple of weeks here where you get things cleaned out in your field just to avoid any kind of potential pest problem going into your next crop.
Well, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but what it's going to mean is more than likely you're going to have to do possibly an additional treatment of a fungicide, 1 or 2, and maybe an additional insecticide spray or even 2. So we talk all the time on the show about how we want to take the best of both the organic world and the conventional farming world. Well, this is, you know, where you might have a little bit of debate. Okay, I want the best of the organic world. I want to raise cover crops. I want to have something growing in there all the time. All right, but if you do that, now in effect, if you don't eliminate the green bridge for a week or 2 prior to planting that fall seeded crop, now you're saying, I can't follow the organic practice because I'm more likely to have disease or insects in there when I don't eliminate the green bridge. So you got to weigh these things out on your farm. All we're trying to say today is if you want less disease, fewer insects in your fall seeded crop, you want to have everything dead in the field for 1 to 2 weeks.
Well, I do like that. I like eliminating the green bridge, and one of the problems that you can have out there is weed control. And if you have our weed of the week, it's one you just can't let go wild in your field. Oh, I gave a little clue there. We'll talk about our weed of the week coming up next.
Your time is valuable. That's why you need a Hagie STS application system. Hagie STS products are designed for precision and efficiency, allowing you to make applications all season long with just one machine. Contact your Hagie rep today.
Our weed of the week is wild cucumber.
You know, the first time Darren and I were talking about this, maybe 15 years ago or so, and we even mentioned it on Ag PhD, I said, boy, I don't know if I've even seen that weed around here. And Darren goes, what are you talking about, Brian? You've got it in your own shelter belt. This problem is a big deal for anyone who does have shelter belts, anyone who has trees, because wild cucumber is a viney weed that will climb up these trees, and I've even found it in some trees 40 feet tall, all the way to the top. It is looking for sunlight. It's looking for those trees that it can vine into and around, and it actually can hurt trees and shelter belts.
Well, for the most part, if somebody lives on a place and they have a shelter belt around their house, they're going to notice this and deal with it. But it's those shelter belts to me that stand out, that are by the abandoned farm place or along the road somewhere where nobody lives in that area, that it just takes a year or 2 years of not being managed, and this weed can just absolutely take over and definitely damage the shelter belt. So you have to get after it as soon as you see it. Now you can start pulling vines out and this kind of thing, but that's a lot of work. And like you said, if they grow 40 feet tall, I'm not really going to climb up in the tree and pull all those vines out.
Well, when we first started studying this weed a little bit, the thing that stood out to me wasn't the vininess. It wasn't, you know, oh, it hurts trees or anything like that. It was a couple of words that I thought were interesting. Pepos for the fruiting body and tendrils for these little pieces of vine that can wrap around some small branches. So pepos and tendrils, and that's what I remember most about wild cucumber.
All right, well, let's talk about control. When we're out in a shelter belt, that really changes things, because there aren't very many products that you're just going to have an aerial applicator fly over a shelter belt to try and control weeds down underneath. I mean, for one, it'd be really tough to get coverage all the way down through that shelter belt. So what I look at is what can we do on the ground as we're walking through a shelter belt to try and control weeds.
Well, you talk about spraying over the top of it. I mean, what herbicide are you going to spray over the top of several different tree species? It's not going to hurt the trees. What we often will discuss in shelter belts is spraying 2,4-D late in the fall after leaves have dropped, or early in the spring before the leaves are back on the trees. Those are the safest times to apply any herbicide in that shelter belt area. And 2,4-D is fairly effective on wild cucumber, but otherwise, like in my shelter belts, I only have a few plants that will pop up, and quite frankly, I just go along and pull them.
Well, that is the old school option, Brian. You
well,
talked about
when you only have
the
10
combination.
plants out there, it's no big deal.
You talked earlier in the show about the combination between organic farming and conventional type farming practices. Here you go. You've got an option. You can do one where you're spraying things, or you can do one where you're not. But if you're going to let this weed get away from you out in a tree belt, I'll promise you, you're not going to be pulling everyone. It's just going to be too much work.
Once again, wild cucumber is a viney weed. It's going to wrap around trees. We find it commonly in shelter belts. The best way to control it is either 2,4-D or just get out there and pull them. But make sure you're diligent about this, because it only takes a couple of weeks. And quite often in my shelter belt, I'll find wild cucumber up 10 feet already in a couple weeks, and it's like, whoa, where did that come from? So this is an aggressive plant. It does grow quickly.
That's all the time we have for this week's Weed of the Week, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
If you're in strip till, where should you put next year's rows? I'll share with you what we do on our farm in today's Iron Talk. When you're doing strip till in the fall, you completely set the table for next year's crop. Fertility is placed in a deep band, your seed bed is prepped, the location of next year's rows of crop is also set. 3 of the bigger benefits of strip tillage as we see it are: number 1, reducing tillage reduces potential erosion. 2. Deep placing fertilizer, especially phosphorus, keeps the fertility safe from tie-up and spring rains. It's also more available to the crop when the summer gets hot and dry. And 3rd, leaving this year's root mass intact help builds organic matter in the soil faster. For these 3 reasons, in our 30-inch rows, we simply move over about 15 inches and build next year's strips in the fall. Leaving residue like cornstalk standing helps keep our crop residues in the field and greatly reduces the chance for any soil erosion by wind or rain. Leaving that root mass intact eliminates the problem of what to do with root balls on the surface and also gives us a chance to till through where any compaction was created by wheel tracks in this year's crop. Other farmers may utilize a different strategy to meet the needs of their cropping system, but for us, we like to build our strips for next year's rows halfway in between this year's rows. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
For lower cost, higher production, Mandaco Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving and rocks and has contour conformity equaling 0 downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted Coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
Experience matters in farming, and when it comes to efficient power, no one has more experience than Case IH. Our industry-leading SCR engine technology has powered over 35,000 pieces of equipment and has over 17 million operating hours in North America alone. It was the right solution from the start, and it's proving itself right again as our new generation of Tier 4B equipment takes to the field. Proven power, proven efficiency, proven in the field. Case IH. Be ready.
Get the most from the genetic potential in your crops, reduce plant stress, and increase yield. BioForge upregulates key genes to keep roots growing and reduce ethylene for improved plant stress tolerance. BioForge mixes well with other products for easy application with every pass through the field. BioForge, progressive growers' choice to improve root growth, reduce crop stress, and increase yield. Make every growing day count with BioForge from Stoller, USA.
If you watch Ag PhD TV, you'll love the new Ag PhD radio show each weekday on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. This is Darren Hefty. On the new Ag PhD radio program, we'll take live callers and provide the agronomic information and brotherly banter you've come to expect from Ag PhD. We'll feature a Back 40 segment where we talk to farmers and agronomists around the country to share what's going on with crop production. And it wouldn't be Ag PhD without addressing a pest of the day. Tune in to the Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80.
Dirty work pays. That is if your dirty work includes a Soil Max Gold Digger tile plow. Soil Max tile plows feature zero deflection technology. With the only tile plow factory paired with Ag Leader's IntelliSlope control system, you eliminate the need for grade calculations and lasers. So make your next investment in a Soil Max Gold Digger. Better yield, longer planting and harvest windows, better water management is all yours with Soil Max. Visit soilmax.com.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but for more agronomic information, we invite you to tune in to SiriusXM Radio, Channel 80, each weekday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Central, as Darren and I host the Ag PhD Radio Show.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD television program, where we'll have another Weed of the Week, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
75 to 95% of soil-applied phosphorus may be tied up and made unavailable to plants. Farmers use organic proteins and other fertilizer innovations to ensure their crops are fed properly. For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.